How long have you been in Encinitas?
I moved up there in 2001
Wow.
from Coronado.
From Coronado. Okay.
Yeah.
Were you stationed in Coronado?
I was in Coronado for SEAL training, and then, this is kind of a funny story. I thought I would head back east because I'm from upstate New York. And in SEAL training, if you graduate number one in your class, they say you get your selection, called a dream sheet. And so I chose SEAL Team 2, which is Virginia Beach. And then my backups were SEAL Team 4 and SEAL Team 8, which were Virginia Beach. And, I was number one graduate out of 185. And so that was a big deal at the time. They said, yeah, you get wherever you want. And then I got my orders, and they said SEAL Team 3, Coronado.
Okay, so you get to choose.
That's when I learned not to trust the Navy too much when they
said
something like that. It's like, they didn't really give a shit. That was all just a story.
That's funny.
So I ended up at SEAL Team 3 in Coronado, and I loved it. But that meant I stayed in Coronado. And so instead of moving back east, I got an apartment in Coronado. And my next door neighbor who shared a balcony was a woman named Sandy, who's now my wife.
All right. So it ended up working out.
It worked out, and there was no way I was going to pry her away from California. I tried.
Got it. So then you guys moved to Encinitas together.
Well, when I got off active duty, or actually in transition from active duty to reserve status, I started a business in Coronado called the Coronado Brewing Company. It's a microbrewery. It's the fourth microbrewery in San Diego.
Nice.
And then I got in, it was my first true entrepreneurial venture. And I made some mistakes primarily in who I partnered with. My partners were my brothers-in-law.
It's a bit, the marriage, right?
Yeah, after
choose who you marry.
After I got the business up and running and successful, all on my money and all on my people investing in my business plan, and my partners didn't put a dime into the business, then their horns came out, and we ended up locked horns for a few years. And so Sandy said, and they were really making it difficult at a family level.
Oh, really?
It got really ugly.
Eesh.
It got really ugly. And so, I was like literally putting my Navy SEAL night vision goggles on. I was going to go to town on these guys and just crush them. She just begged me. She just, Mark, just walk away. And I was like, use
the meditation side of yourself.
Exactly. I was like, I had to go back to that Zen mind. It's like, oh yeah, you're right. This isn't worth the fight.
Yeah.
So I literally handed them the keys to the business. They brew over 40,000 barrels a year now. The business is probably worth $20 or $30 million, and I walked away from it.
Wow.
And handed the keys to them because they were just such jerks, and they were killing the family. And the irony is, it didn't do any good for the family. They still haven't talked to me or my wife, their sister, since we walked away, which was 2002 or 3.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, these guys weren't good people.
That is wild. When I hear those kinds of stories, there's the amount of time that kind of resentment can
they just hold
last.
on to it.
Yeah.
Well, people create these stories. Meditation, by the way, breaks stories, right? If you're not meditating, the stories calcify and they begin to grow, and then you start to believe your own bullshit, right? And so unless you have a practice of self-awareness, which these guys did not, then you begin to believe your own bullshit. And so the story of theirs that allowed them to do what they did and then feel justified, right? They couldn't walk away from that story.
Yeah, well, especially if you have a huge part of your identity wrapped up.
Your identity was wrapped up.
If you make your identity too big, and then you
right, so their identity is now that they are the founders of this hugely successful microbrewery, and it was all there. There was all their energy, all their creativity, and they've pretty much written me out of anything of the story. But the reality is, I was the MBA, CPA, Navy SEAL who raised the $1.5 million, who put all my money in, and got the place open and profitable and growing. And they didn't put a dime into the business. And they didn't raise any money. And they didn't work in the business except to come in at beer 30 and give away food and beer, and which is one of the sources of kind of where the conflict began.
Yeah.
And they did contribute, some creative ideas and, a referral here and there, but the hard work as an entrepreneur is, first of all, the vision, and then the capitalization, and then elbow grease, getting it up and running and profitable. At any rate, once a business is there, then the hard work is sustaining the vision and building a team. and the team getting the team aligned and all rowing in the same direction. And that's what you've been experiencing in Mudwater. It's not easy. That's Shane's primary job.
Yeah, we were talking about it today on a call where he said that the first job of a founder is to build a company, and the second job is to build a team that builds the company.
That's right.
And giving it up and
That's right.
stepping away from role after role after role so that you can scale it.
Mm-hmm.
So what was, you mentioned that you're ready to put your night vision goggles on and your wife persuaded you not to. Was there a day that you remember that made you decide, okay, I'm actually just going to walk away from this. This is not worth my time anymore. And I want to just take my life in a direction where I don't have this kind of conflict anymore, because it's certainly a universal story. It's a story of when to walk away from relationships.
That's right. Yeah. And recognition that the relationships that are causing us the most challenge are because we've attracted it and we've got something really important to learn from it, right? And so these guys literally were making my blood boil. And you're talking to a Navy SEAL who had been a practitioner of Zen at that point. Now we're talking about 1999, 2000, and I'd studied Zen since 1985, so 15 years. And yet these two guys could make my blood boil. And I was like, what is going on here? And same thing with Sandy was just going nuts because they were torching the family. And the parents actually got divorced over this because it's a 3-beer story.
Not their microbrewery, though.
It's a three mud story. We won't have the beers there because I'm persona non grata. But I had to, we sat down and it's like, oh my God, this is simply gonna kill us if we stay engaged in relationship with this and continue to fight. And I know that we could have won on tactical grounds. We won 3 years of proxy. This is how bad it was. We're literally every year I had to fight for control of the business. But these guys, in my codependence, even though they didn't contribute a penny to the business, I allowed them to have equal ownership with me. It was a big mistake. So that was my shadow self from my childhood trauma. Was like, I'm extraordinarily codependent. And I just said, I just give everybody everything, but then I don't take care of my own needs. I don't set up boundaries. And I never learned that because I grew up in a pretty, alcoholic, traumatic family environment. So it's pretty common for people who in those environments not to really understand how to set boundaries and to take care of yourself. They end up taking care of everyone else. And that's kind of what I had done.
Was it a series of conversations with your wife that ultimately led to that decision?
It was. I mean, just like, that saying that everything happens slow until it happens fast.
Yeah.
Right? So this was like a slow build. And the nastiness of these two guys and how they handle things, they called it the scorched earth policy. Like, they had nothing going on in their lives, and they did not want to be, they wanted to be in control of this business. And they realized that they weren't in control. So the only way they could get control is if they could drive me out. So they tried that through these proxies. They failed every one because all the investors, who invested in me would vote with me, and we kept on getting.
Yeah, you're investing in a person.
Yeah, a little over 50%. We always had control of the business, but at the family level, they started to chip away at the mom and dad, and the dad was a former Marine, and he was an honorable person, and he said, I'm not going to take sides in this battle, and I think Mark's an honorable guy, and he was doing the right thing for the business, protecting the shareholders' interest, trying to grow this thing. And the mom was on the other side, and her boys could do no wrong, and Mark must be the evil empire who's come in and, blown up this family and kind of thing. And so that came to a head when suddenly they got divorced, and that just crushed my wife. Like, her heart broke on that. She's like, this isn't worth it. And so I was still kind of being a little stubborn and obstinate at that point. I was like, you know what, I can win this battle, built this business. These guys this is crazy. Like, it's absolutely insane what they're doing. She goes, I know it is, but it's just not worth it, right? It's not healthy for us or for anybody. The money doesn't matter. I don't care if it's worth $100 million someday. And so we walked away from it, and so I completely started all over. And we moved up to Encinitas, and that's when and I love it because these stories always in retrospect, you're like, oh, of course I had to walk away from that. Like the business was not the right business for me. I came from an alcoholic family, and now I'm running a brewery.
Right. Yeah.
Like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it, Kyle? Right? Yeah, no.
In retrospect, it's easy.
No, but at the time as a Navy SEAL, I was like, free beer for life sounded like a damn good deal. And I was really proud of the business, but it wasn't the right business for me. So ironically, I had also, during that time, kind of like stopped my practice. Everything was so intense that I'd like just, as a lot of people know, when you have a meditation practice and then a bomb goes off in your life, either a health bomb or some fiscal crisis, something like this, it's very hard to stay true to that practice. So this was like a 3 or 4 year bomb, and so I was very hard to stay true to my practice. And so I said, you know what, never again, and I'm going to get back and sit on the mat every single day, or the bench for me, because I was a Zen guy too. And so I went back to the bench, and I started to reflect upon, what it was that about meditation and the process that led me to shift my first career, my first kind of major inflection point was I was on Wall Street working as a CPA and getting my MBA at Stern School of Business, and I was heading up that trajectory. And meditation like cracked me wide open like an egg, and what came out was the warrior that became the Navy SEAL commander.
Right, you decided to forego that path and become a Navy SEAL. Right.
That process, I talk about that process in my book, The Way of the SEAL. It was a really cool process. We can come back to that because I know we wanted to talk a little bit about meditation. So I recognized that in my transition from active duty Navy SEAL into the reserves and wanting to get back into business but not go back to that, or back to the family business back home in the East Coast, that I didn't apply the clarification techniques that meditation brings to define what type of business I should start. Right? Like I think about like Shane's origin story, right? He had a little bit of clarity, and so there's integrity in how he started that. For me, it was really wanting to get into business, loving the idea of building a microbrewery, and loving beer, right? And that was enough energy for me to get this thing started, but obviously
it wasn't a deep enough why.
It wasn't a deep enough why, and the spiritual energy was completely misaligned, and so it makes sense that this conflict arose to jettison me out of the business because it wasn't the right thing. We wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation had I stayed in that business, because I'd be a microbrewing guy. I wouldn't be a teacher.
But that kind of fun energy can keep you going for a few years as you experience, right?
But eventually, if you're not aligned and it's not the right mission, you're either going to get jettisoned or you're going to hit a wall. You're going to hit that midlife crisis, or you're going to hit some sort of existential crisis. So that would have happened eventually anyways. So I feel very grateful that I had that very intense experience and I got jettisoned, or I jettisoned myself, as opposed to having that, taken 10 or 15 years and then trying to figure out how do you walk away from a business that's now worth tens of millions of dollars, and how do I get out of this thing?
Yeah, I just finished a really good book called Liar's Poker by Michael Lewis. The writer Michael Lewis. He wrote Moneyball. He wrote The Big Short. One of my favorite writers. And he was being interviewed, and the story of Liar's Poker is him taking this high-paying job as a young guy at Salomon Brothers, making a shit ton of money, and it's a funny book, and it's this insider's look at Wall Street during the 1980s, and really asking the question, why are these young people making so much money, and why is Wall Street taking up so much of the economy during this period of time? So it was this window into that.
It's gotten worse, by the way.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Well, it was interesting because he was, he's writing about the 1980s, and then you're like, man, there's some real parallels of what he's writing about then to what
I was on Wall Street in the 80s. I was working with Coopers and Lybrand, and my client was Salomon Brothers.
Oh, really?
And then Drexel Burnham Lambert, remember that?
Okay, is that from the book, or?
It might be in his book. That was the company that blew up because of the junk bond Michael Milken.
Okay, I don't think that's in the book.
Yeah,
but
I'm not sure. I haven't read that book. But Salomon Brothers, Lehman Brothers, a bunch of others were my clients, and I was basically on the auditing consulting side.
Wow.
But I remember, I think they called it Black Monday in 1985 when the stock market crashed. 500 points, right, which seemed like a lot. Doesn't seem like anything today. We have those swings like all the time.
Right.
But it was massive back then.
Yeah.
And people were like jumping out of windows, and people
Yeah,
lost their fortunes.
It's a wild story into this culture, and he lays it out. But the point I was going to make is that he's being interviewed years after, where he at the time had been writing articles, and he just loved to write. That was his thing. But he was in Salomon Brothers, and he was being carved this path to assure fortune. And what he noticed starting to happen was people's lives adapted to that wealth, so that then they relied on the making of that money, and their personalities in kind changed.
Yeah.
And he noticed that if he didn't leave, he was never going to write a book. He was never going to be the writer that he knew was his destiny. And he left, and people were like, "What are you doing?" And in hindsight, it ended up working out. But I think about that in regards to your story in walking away, because also, had you been in that crazy conflict for another decade, maybe you would have made the money, but also who would you have been by then?
That's right.
Another decade of thinking those kinds of thoughts really changes your neural pathways, man.
Sure.
I mean, that's part of the real power of meditation, is it gets you to recognize those paths that your psyche is starting to gravitate towards. So maybe without the Zen practice, you may never have been able to make that decision and get out and choose the path that you did.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that's possible as well. In any regard, yeah, so having an internal practice leads to clarity, and a foundational practice, even if you walk away from it, brings lifetime benefits. But just like exercise, right, if you walk away from a practice, then the benefits start to wane. Doesn't mean it wasn't beneficial. It just means that they start to wane, and you can really lose sight of that clarity. The benefit being that you can gain it back quicker because you have, greased the groove of some neural pathways that you can quickly light back up again. So when I went back to the bench after that Coronado Brewing Company kind of episode, I actually accelerated my practice, and it was deeper. Because I felt much more sense of urgency around it, because I was like, I see how far you can get off track if you're not, looking for that clarity every day in stillness and in a dedicated practice. And also because I had developed some other skills that I found to be really beneficial through the SEALs, right? My concentration was much, much deeper. And I was able to bring that concentration power into my meditation practice, which really, really took it to a whole nother level.
So at what age were you at this time that you walked away and you went back to your practice?
Oh, man, I was already in my mid-30s.
Okay.
Yeah. I went in the SEALs when I was 25. So my first career was CPA on Wall Street, just to say that. So that was 1985 to 1989. I got my MBA at Stern School of Business, became a certified public accountant, worked for Coopers & Lybrand, which is now PricewaterhouseCoopers, for 2 years, and then Arthur Andersen for 2 years.
Got it.
And in the first year is when I started my Zen training. And that was just pure happenstance. I was looking for something else to do physically, and I found a martial arts, and it just so happens the martial artist was a grandmaster, a Japanese grandmaster named Tadashi Nakamura, who had founded this style of karate. Had 300,000 students worldwide.
Wow.
But he was also a Zen master.
What was his name?
Nakamura.
And where did you study with him?
Right down on 23rd Street and Broadway in Manhattan.
Okay.
Isn't that wild?
And what kind of martial art were you practicing?
It was traditional karate.
Okay. And he then introduced you to
So
Zen meditation.
He had a small group on Thursday nights after the black belt class. And mind you, this is his headquarters, and so at his headquarters, he probably had over 1,000 students. And Thursday night, I stayed one night, and this is about 2 months after I started training there, and I'm a white belt. eyes wide open, going, what's going on here? So I stayed to watch the black belt class. And after the black belt class is over, all the black belts file out except for about 10 of them. And they go over to this other section of the dojo, and this is a big 2,000 square foot whole floor of this building, beautiful wood floor, very traditional Japanese karate studio. And the lights went down, and they started to bring out these little zazen benches, which I didn't know what they were at the time. And he asked everyone to leave. And I asked someone as I was going on, I said, what are they doing? He said, oh, that's the Zen. It's not really a class, but that's the Zen group, And I was like, And so I did a little research on that, and I said, that's something I really want to do. So I asked if I could join. I was the only white belt who joined. And it was wild. So there I was, just sitting on that bench, and he didn't really give instruction. You just did it. You know what I mean? And you learned through the doing. And then after every class, he had a little chalkboard, with the old chalk, black and white. And he would write these kanji characters, and then underneath he would write it. It was like a little koan, and he would give a little Zen talk, like a Dharma talk. Man, I treasured those. And some of the richest learning I think I had during this period came from that juxtaposition of being, doing hardcore physical training on the dojo floor and then just sitting in stillness afterwards for an hour. And I loved it so much that without any prompting, I just started doing it every morning, and I did it every morning while I was in New York City, and that practice is what led me to unwind the story of what led me to be a CPA, MBA, blah, blah, blah,
right.
To understanding that my calling was to be a warrior, and then I learned about the SEALs, and then, I had the courage to kind of go in that direction. But in the SEALs, we were gone all the time. We were always on the move, and so it was very difficult to have like a seated meditation practice, and I hadn't developed the skill yet to do what they call taking the practice off the mat or off the bench, where it becomes your constant companion. So I didn't practice my Zen, but the SEALs do mental training of another sort, right? Which is very similar to different meditation practices, which is why Navy SEALs develop, their mind in such powerful ways, right? But they're not sitting and meditating, right? They're just learning to use their mind, like in a super concentrated, powerful way to solve problems, to stay focused, on long ops, to develop situational or contextual awareness, which is like mindfulness. And so I was still really developing my mind in those ways, but what was lacking was just the radical stillness that I would find at the end of long Zen sessions. And it's in the radical stillness, absent of mind or beyond mind, which is the Zen would call mu, M-U, which means no mind. When you drop out of the mind, you go beyond the mind, and you're operating out of pure awareness, that's when you have access to the clarity, to the insight, to the heart's, calling or yearnings, right?
Right.
And I wasn't getting that with the type of work I was doing in the SEALs. That was more outward focused, laser focusing your mind, and you can accomplish incredible things.
Yeah, it's concentrated, but you're concentrating on a task.
It's concentrating outwardly on a task.
Right.
It's important to develop that concentration power, but then with meditation, we want to turn the light around and point that light inward. And then eventually you want to let go of all efforting and just surrender. It took me a long time to learn that last part, right? Because once you put all your effort into efforting, it seems like that's where you're going to find the results. This is kind of what we were talking about before we started.
This is exactly the conversation that I want to have right now, because I feel a paradox in my own life with my practice, which is usually 20 minutes in the morning or 20 minutes in the evening to help me go to sleep. And I feel this paradox between wanting to get better at meditation and deepen my practice, and also noticing that when I'm not actively trying to get better at it, I can just let my mind wander too much, and it feels like there are no stakes attached to it.
That's right.
Right, and I feel a kind of stagnation. So I would say that I'm in that place where I'm trying to notice, like, bringing more intensity into a practice, I think, and attaching stakes to anything that you're doing can be really beneficial, but a lot of teachers will try and pull back their students from that because, as you said, it's also about this surrender. So I personally, at this stage of my life, find a lot of difficulty between like how much do I turn that dial up and back to find that sweet spot, because there are stakes to meditation, and it's not just a solitary practice. It does have real implications to your life. It has implications on your relationship. It allows you to make better decisions with your partner, with your friends, in business and life. Like, it opens up, in my experience, the superpower of meditation is that it opens up choice where you previously didn't see that. And if you see that choice again and again, it's going to change where you're at in a few years.
Change your entire trajectory. Meditation leads to freedom. And your struggle or your challenges are very common, but it's not in the common lexicon to know how to solve it or to even know that it's a problem.
Right.
So that first off, I will say, Kyle, that shows that you've made great progress. So good job. What I will say is, from my own experience now as a teacher, right? So once I got back on track, I said, okay, this is incredibly important. I've got the physical down. I can accomplish business building, and I've got a great relationship. I really want to learn how to teach others how to do this effectively. So in order to do that, I've got to go really, really deep into this and learn everything that everyone else has learned and said about it. And so I went on a 20-year quest of just deep practices, but also exploring all sorts of different practices. I'm going over 1,000 hours of yoga teacher training, and I went deep into Zen again. Then I went into Dzogchen, Tibetan meditation, and tried all sorts of different things. And I kept coming back to simplicity. Like it doesn't have, like, a lot of these systems are overcomplicating it. And so while I'm going on that quest, I'm also teaching. And so I started teaching Spec Ops scans, SEALs, through SEALFit, which is my new business, which was in alignment with my calling and my passion.
Deeper why.
My much deeper why. And this SEALFit came about in 2006, which was 4 or 5 years after. And that story of how that came about was really cool, because I was in combat. I was in Iraq. I had gotten recalled active duty as a reservist and went to Iraq, and I was doing my own practice over there. And it was an integrated training practice. So that had integration of traditional asana and some qigong and some breath work. And this is 2006, right? So, or 2004, stuff that now seems to be like coming a little bit more common. And I was just experimenting with integrating these different modalities: breath, meditation, visualization, and movement. And what I found was, while I was in Iraq, all of my teammates were, after months, were starting to fray at the seams and, really, really showing signs of struggle, right? And I was feeling stronger and stronger and more and more clear. And that clarity led me to, at the time, I was working at University of San Diego, launching a leadership institute, and I was an adjunct professor there, and I was getting my doctorate in leadership. But in one of my meditation sessions, I just had this radical clarity that was not the path, right? Back to your comment, like 1 degree off. I was meant to develop leaders, but not teach leadership in a sterile academic setting. And how did I want to develop leaders? I wanted to do basically what I was doing for leaders. I wanted to bring them an integrated development practice so that they could be better leaders. Because if the integrated development practice made you more clear and allowed better decision making, then it would make you a better leader, right? It's about character development. So I quit my PhD, quit my job at USD when I came back from Iraq, and that's when I launched SEALFit. And there's a little bit of a couple, nothing's ever that direct, but pretty much, like that, pretty much like that. So I started to teach SEALs and Spec Ops, and I had to like radically simplify things because, special operators are extraordinarily practical people, and they didn't want to hear me talking about yoga, or they didn't even want to hear me talking about meditation, or breath control or any of that woo-woo shit. They just wanted me to teach them how to be better warriors. And so I called it, I had to take the foo out of the kung fu. And I took yoga asana and I turned it into drills, and I called it things like, okay, we're going to do the hip mobility drill.
Meanwhile, they're in downward dog.
They were totally in downward dog, and they were doing, side angle pose and
Ha, got you fuckers.
Totally.
I tricked you.
I developed a whole sequence that had like 20 asanas in it, and it was just hip mobility drill, left side, right side.
You got to speak their language, man.
Yeah, and they loved it. They're like, this is awesome stuff.
I feel so good. Yeah.
But if I had said, hey, we're going to do yoga, they would never in a million years done yoga. But nowadays, because they realize they've been doing yoga, the SEALs love yoga.
Right.
And I've taught a lot, like hundreds and hundreds of SEALs yoga, stuff like that. And so part of that was also before every workout where we're going to, just be throwing barbells around and just doing hardcore stuff, we would sit and we would box breathe. But if I told them, well, we're going to do pranayama, you know what I mean, with this ratio that's going to do this and this and this.
Yeah, you got to meet
like
people where they are.
That's right.
Take them someplace they've never been. You mentioned visualization. I wanted to ask you more about that. So let's say that's one where I think still a lot of people like, okay, visualization, that sounds like the secret kind of shit. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of eye rolling there, or just like maybe even not even clarity on what to visualize or how to visualize. And oftentimes when people try it, they may start a kind of visualization and then just get distracted or not know how to land the plane and feel like it was a successful session. For someone who's new to the practice of visualization, what would a first session look like?
First session would look like me explaining why. Why are we visualizing? What's the outcome we're looking for? And proving to them that it works, and that they can, because not everyone can visualize, or not everyone thinks that they can visualize, because it's a skill that can be developed or needs to be developed. Visualization has two primary purposes, and we have to recognize that when we're visualizing, we are using our mind in the temporal material sense to achieve an outcome, right? And so it's not the same as meditation. I don't put visualization in the bucket of meditation. I put it as a skill that complements either healing or manifestation, which is back to the secret. So I don't love that term. I would say destiny creation. It complements and is a force for healing in a retrospective sense, or aligning and powering up your destiny in a futuristic sense.
I like that.
So which is different than a meditative practice to basically remove your mind from the material temporal time space continuum, and to go beyond that. Because in pure awareness, there is no experience of time or space. And so we have to be clear what we're talking about with visualization. So if your only practice is visualization, then you're training your mind to stay in linear time. Now, it's really powerful when used appropriately, because visualization can be used to heal trauma all the way back to, your childhood. And I call that recapitulation. So the practice we have for recapitulation is to use imagery to go back and to recontextualize. And this is nothing new. We do this now in EMDR, and there's other therapeutic practices. And I think hypnotherapy and NLP have been manipulative tools that have used imagery to achieve certain. I don't love those practices because they're easy to abuse, or to get kind of sideways with them if you do it on your own, or if you don't do it with someone with a very, very high level of consciousness who have nothing but your best intentions anyway. So I like to leave those alone. But self-guided visualization for healing is very powerful. It's difficult work because you first have to develop the awareness to know that there's some sort of shadow trauma that is causing the pattern that is disrupting your life. The yogis would call that a samskara, so that you know where to take your mind back in the retrospective theoretical past to be able to do that kind of work.
Well,
So this isn't simple. This takes a little bit of work.
So say that once more. So you need to recognize a story that you already have that's inhibiting you from this positive visualization.
And you have to recognize that there is some trauma-inspired or triggered event in the past that you, at that time, you did not have the awareness and the skill to deal with because it was too painful. And so that energy got suppressed or repressed, whatever word we want to choose.
Right. Your parents get divorced and you think it's your fault even though you were 6 years old.
Exactly, something like that.
Therefore, you never want to rock the boat ever again in your life.
That's right.
Something like
that. And so you
that.
become really passive in relationships and whatever. And so some people never have that awareness that passivity is a result of the divorce, and so they don't do this work. That's why therapy is helpful, because you can have an expert kind of point your way. But once that happens, like talk therapy isn't enough to eradicate that. So we can use multimodalities, and imagery is one of the most powerful, is to go back and to relive it, and then to use certain techniques to discharge the energy, to recontextualize that, to see the benefit that it brought, and then to release that energy. Especially
to see the benefit that your reaction
to benefit
brought.
that everything happens for a reason,
right?
And say, okay, even a childhood trauma has a silver lining.
Yeah,
right?
so the therapists always say, well, that served you in that moment. Everything that you did had a service. That's like one of my favorite things that Gabor Mate, the expert on addiction, says. Is he always asks you, what did the drug give you?
Yes, right.
Right? It always gives you something. And to really dig into that is, there's a lot of interesting shit when you start asking what heroin was giving you.
Right. So imagery is very powerful in that past sense, in the linear time continuum. But also the way we use it mostly is to create a memory of a future which is built upon the information you receive from the rest of your meditation practice, which is clarity around your calling. Right? And this is where people get it wrong. So they build a dream board, and they say they want these things which are external manifestations of success, but just like me with the brewery, if what you're doing and who you are, leading to that success isn't on point, those things may or may not show up, but you're still not going to be happy, or you're not going to be fulfilled. You're not going to have peace of mind and contentment or joy.
Right. It doesn't matter how much money you make.
Doesn't
you're
matter.
still going to have that story in your head.
You still live a life of regret and have all that stuff. So true meditation will unlock the calling, right? That clarity around the calling. Then what we do is we take that and we articulate it into a vision, and then we practice that vision. And when you practice imagery, what you're doing is it's kind of like you're adding energy. Just like take a ball of string and just keep on wrapping string. It gets bigger and bigger and thicker and thicker. And it's got more weight and it's got more heft to it. So when you practice your calling, and it's some sort of time in the future that feels right for you, and you create imagery around that, then you're adding energy to that. And what it does is it creates a memory of a future event or a future you. And the more you practice that, the more energy you give to that, the more it draws you toward it, and the more it's in your omnipresent field of energy while you're going about your everyday stuff. And so that as you're coming across important decisions, important yes/no moments, it's always there for you. And that energy, you can immediately align with it and say yes, no, this fits or this doesn't fit.
So how much do you think visualization is reliant on first going back to a past trauma? Like, let's say that, I want to become the best damn street juggler in the whole wide world, but every time I think about that future and with the crowd around me, I'm like, oh, I just don't know if I could do it. I'm not I could never juggle 6 balls at once. I'll be a failure. Like,
they're important to do these in hand and glove, right? Because if you're trying to visualize a future that, you know, your meditation shows you is like, oh yeah, I am meant to be that street juggler, but, you know, I'm a cook. And you're going to visualize that all you want, and you're going to grow energy. But if you have a childhood trauma that says you're not worthy of being anything, especially not that street juggler, then you won't have the courage to do it.
Right. It doesn't matter what
Matter
goal
what,
you go. It's
right.
like how you do something.
You're
It's
always
how you
going
do
to
everything.
sabotage yourself.
Right. It doesn't matter what you go after.
And so some people go at it. It really depends upon the individual and the trajectory of your life, or the, you know, the archetypal journey. That's your hero's journey. Some people have clarity earlier on in their life, and so they'll visualize it and they'll start moving to it, and then they find they sabotage themselves, and then they sabotage themselves again. That's the prototypical hero's journey. It's those moments of sabotage where they fall back and say, okay, what the hell went wrong? That opens up the opportunity for the growth, and the growth comes from the healing and integrating things from the past and this energy that's holding you back. So then you'll go back and do the imagery work, clear that up, and then spring forward, right? Gives you all this new energy. It's like you felt like you were dragging kettlebells behind you, and now they're gone. And now you have, and you feel like you're racing toward that vision until the next obstacle shows up. And then you have to fall back and say, what was that? Oh, there's another pattern that I have to unwind.
Is there a way to do visualization work without first seeing a therapist in your experience? Effective visualization work where you could just sit down?
If you learn how to do it
Okay.
with a teacher, it's just like meditation. I feel like what's really missing in this country or in the West is effective teaching, because you can just go all over the place and waste time and run around in circles or chase the next shiny thing and get nowhere fast. But if you had, and the way meditation and all these things were taught, because visualization was also taught part of these lineages, including Zen, including yoga, but for very specific purposes like we're talking about, right? So like another way use for visualization is for longevity, right? You know, there's a practice around visualizing the chakras, spinning and healing and opening, drawing energy in, expelling toxicity, and the advanced yogis were able to tune their body to a very, very high level of frequency and to live a very long time. And they did all that with imagery work. Having said that, if they had traumas in their past, they had to clean that up first, right? And also they were clear about their future because they had that, you know, they'd done a lot of work there too. Anyway, so it's if you just sit down and say, well, I'm going to visualize, and you don't have some effective training in terms of how to get your mind stabilized enough to do this work, right, with the right amount of concentration power and also the right positive energy, you can end up, it's kind of like psychedelics, you can end up really stuck or actually doing some harm, right? So there's a path. That's why we call it a path or a way. Karate Do is a way. And every individual has a little bit unique entry point to a path and needs some unique training because everyone's different. Everyone has a different karmic energy, epigenetic energy, you know, life trajectory, like archetypal journey, which is why it's very hard to find success with meditation if you're just using an app or, you know, if you just kind of jump in. It's much easier if you find a credible teacher and you stay the course until you figure out that, okay, now you've got a good headwind and strong momentum and you have clarity on the tools and the processes and the practices, and you've developed the discipline for the daily practice so that you can then kind of do it on your own. And ultimately, you will do it on your own, but to begin from ground zero, it's extraordinarily helpful to have effective teaching.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, we really lack mentorship, which is...
In this inner domain, we do.
In this domain, but I've really sought out a lot of mentors in my life, and I early on just thought, like, wait, why isn't everyone doing this? Like, this man or woman has literally lived way more years than I already have, and they're doing something that I want to do. Chances are they've run into a few of the same speed bumps that I'm going to. Mm-hmm. like, why wouldn't I just ask them?
Right.
I mean, it's literally like, I don't know where I don't have directions, and this person has driven this road already. Yeah. Why wouldn't I just ask them? It's crazy to me that more people don't don't ask.
A lot of people, especially guys, at least my generation, you know, it's kind of like driving directions.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good analogy. We don't want to ask for fucking directions. I fucking know where we're going, babe.
We're supposed to know how to do it.
Yeah, we're in a swamp.
Don't tell me how to do this shit. There is a standardization, like a generalization that I can make, though. And this is for someone who might be like, tried a few different things.
Yeah. Let's say that someone is curious about visualization. Yeah. They have a base meditation practice, and they want to try something.
Well,
they want to try.
I want to back it up even further, because I think a lot of people struggle with meditation, and they think meditation is just putting on Headspace and listening to the download of the day. That's relaxation, right? So many people struggle with deeper meditation because their body is in a state of hyperarousal. And you guys have talked a lot about that in your podcast with breath training, the things that de-arouse the body, right? Somatic work, breath training, hot, cold, you know. And so those are all really healthy, because everybody in this country is in a state of hyperarousal because our culture is hyper-aroused. And now we know through the research that those pathways that lead to the sympathetic, parasympathetic, I mean, there's specific neurotransmitters, and they can get stuck. You get stuck on in hyperarousal, and you can't even get into the de-arousal. So I start everyone there, even the SEAL candidates. I said, first, what we're going to do is arousal control, and we're going to just use box breathing, and we're not going to worry about what our mind is doing. And this is like a Trojan horse, because what the mind is doing is following the box pattern, and they're basically doing a concentration practice, but for the purpose of arousal control, calming themselves down. So they're calming the body and the brain down, because the brain is just an organ. The subjective experience as the body-brain calms down is clarity, a little bit more clarity, a little less frequency of thought, because your brain is settling into that high alpha, low beta, and so you don't have the popcorn brain or the monkey mind, right? And suddenly it's settling down. You're still thinking. And then we go into explaining, okay, so what we're doing when we follow this pattern is concentration, and so what we want you to do is to pay attention when your mind either splits into two, and you're doing the box pattern and you're breathing, and you're also thinking about something else, or you've completely forgotten about the box breathing and you're wandering off and you've lost your attention. And when that happens, you're going to bring it back to the box pattern. And we're going to practice that for a while now, months. And what happens there is the mind, because it's got a hook, it's got an object of concentration, which in this course is the pattern, the box breathing pattern.
For people who don't know, what is box breathing pattern?
It's controlled breathing where you have a hold on your inhale and the exhale, or after the inhale and exhale. So 5-count inhale, 5-count hold, 5-count exhale, 5-count hold. And in my experience and research teaching, starting in 2006 with the SEALs, this is extremely safe and extremely effective at calming you down and creating clarity, which is what SEALs need when they're in combat, right? They need to stay calm, and they need to have clarity to make good decisions, right? And that's about it. It's a concentration practice that combines with deep, deep calmness. But as a foundation for further work, it is money, right? So now we've got the arousal control, and once you train that, then with just a few breaths, boom, your body clicks back into this parasympathetic state, calm, rest, digest, and then you're able to follow that box pattern. And the longer you do that practice, the longer you can stay concentrated. So your staying power, increases. The ability to detect when you've either split attention or lost your attention, it completely dramatically improves, so that then you can redirect and bring your attention back. And this has incredible benefits for getting shit done.
Yeah,
right?
That's the superpower.
That's a superpower, right?
Overcome
Right
distraction.
there, it's a superpower. But still, it's part of this process. It's a part of the process, and it's generally still outward focused, like we were talking about earlier. You're using your mind to train your mind to be more effective at the quality, directionality, and the energy of your thinking. And so then during this practice, now we start to get them to pay attention to those things. So now that we have the ability to hold your attention, what we're going to do is we're going to now create a metacognitive compartmentation in your brain, and you're going to set up shop in one side, and you're going to start watching the thinking. And in thinking, I also put emotional patterns, which is just a felt thought. And in this scenario, it's similar to mindfulness, except that what we're actually doing is we're like setting up a internal sniffer and saying, what is the quality of this thought? Is this thought that I'm having right now, is it positive or is it negative? And if it's negative, we want to turn it to positive, because negativity weakens you and it destroys your performance, and it'll lead you down a rabbit hole, right? And many people are really negative, and so this becomes a big part of their work. It's like, wow, I didn't realize I was so negative. And secondarily, is this thought productive, right? Is this leading you toward your mission? What if you don't know what your mission is? Well, then start to think about that, right? So are these thoughts you're having, are they productive and leading toward a mission, or are they something that were planted there by your family? So this is where you begin to deconstruct the stories, right, of your life.
So before even trying to visualize the thing that you want, you're getting into breathing, which I'm leading to visualization.
Totally.
It makes a lot of sense, because whenever I do breath work, I notice the quality of my thoughts change.
That's right.
Almost immediately.
Right.
That's the fastest way that I can all of a sudden bring in, like, oh, there were some good things that happened today.
That's
or
right.
like, I like that.
That's right.
I like that guy. Like, it's so interesting how changing the way that I breathe, or just doing a few rounds of breath work, all of a sudden will bring about thoughts that were previously unaccessible.
Right. The breath is remarkably powerful. It's not just oxygen that we're breathing. It's life force, prana, intelligence. The breath is considered by the yogis, ancient yogis, to be the bridge between the body and the mind and the spirit. And so what you're doing is you're kind of bringing everything together. It's an integrative practice. And the breath itself is supremely positive. It's your mind that is negative. And so when you take conscious control of your breathing and you start to watch your mind, then you can begin to feel the energy of the breath moving the mind, and you get really, really notice when the mind is moving in a negative pattern versus a positive pattern, and you're like, it becomes very, very obvious, and you're just like, wow. Like you said, the positive things and the positive energy starts to be qualitatively different, and you start to see where you're negative or where you're obsessing about things, and you begin to then curate that stuff out of your life.
Got it.
So this is like phase 2 or 3. Phase 1 is breathing for arousal control. Phase 2 is breathing for concentration and attention control.
Right, and noticing when your attention is just diverting, and then trying to bring it back. So then at least you could hold visualization. You can hold your attention.
And we're getting up to the visual. So all of this is so you can hold your attention. Then we begin to work with the content of your mind.
I'm so happy that you're taking me through this process, by the way, because I don't know if I articulated it well, but what I was getting at is I find visualization to be tough because you get into it and then your mind runs away from you. So you don't land the plane.
You don't land the plane, right.
And then you're like, fuck, I suck. Yeah. I can't even do this.
Visualization is like a practice that's built on top of these other practices. Because if you this is why the secret didn't work or doesn't work, because if you just jump in and try to visualize, your mind is bouncing all over the place. Secondarily, you have all these negative mental patterns, and those are going to take over your visualization, and you might just manifest something negative.
Right. I want a car. I should look that up on Instagram. Oh, that's the car I want. Oh, man, I'm mad. Right. Wonder who my ex-girlfriend's doing. They're like, shit, never going to get the car.
Right. So the metacognition practice then curates the negative out, and then you emphasize the positive, and also you bring more positive in. And then, we call this feeding the courage well. If you begin to open up to the courage, to the positivity, getting out of the head and into the heart, and just opening all that up. So that practice then it's an inward practice. So now you've turned the attention inward, because now you've kind of, You've drawn away from thoughts, like you're going more inward. And the thoughts are like out here, and you start to detach. You don't identify. And so this is one of the beautiful outcomes of this stage of the practice, is that when shit happens, you just watch it and go, oh, look at that shit, that's really interesting. And you even look at your thought patterns get spun up by that, and yet you're watching those thought patterns and you say, that's really interesting, look at that. I could have easily gotten triggered there, because look at my thoughts going. And then you get back control of it. And so you become very non-reactionary. You don't become passive, just non-reactionary, and you have all this space to make a better choice.
Yeah.
That's huge, right?
Big difference between thinking bad things and doing bad things.
That's right. That's huge. That's a big deal. And all of a sudden you become more effective as a parent, as a leader, just from that skill as well. And so we continue our practice now. And so now what we're looking for is where you're at, is where, okay, now what? What's the next thing? And the next thing is not a thing. It's to start letting go. Start letting go of the efforting. Everything I've talked about requires effort. So this is when we let go of the box breathing, we let go of the attention control practice, we let go of the monitoring, and we just begin to surrender into the experience. And what we're looking for is the difference between monitoring thoughts and just pure witnessing being alive, witnessing the experience of life. And I believe that experience of witness is like where mind meets pure awareness. Pure awareness being the source of all things, right? The unity experience is found in pure awareness. The mind is always going to be in duality, but there is a singular point where you can experience both simultaneously, and we'll call that the witness. Witnessing is not the same as monitoring or mindfulness, but it has similar qualities to it, but it's just you're on the other side of the mind. You're even witnessing the mind. When you and you can't try to have this experience, Kyle. This is what I mean by surrendering at this point. Stop all efforting. Recognize that you've trained your mind enough, and any further training is going to lock you in your mind. And at this point now you have to surrender and just be present. Just be with whatever's going on. You're not trying to do mindfulness. You're not trying to concentrate. You're not trying to box breathe. You're not trying to do anything. You're just trying to experience life for life. And what happens is the experience is just utter stillness, right? It is the absolute most raw stillness. And in that stillness, suddenly you get the insights. Suddenly you get the knowingness about what's bothering you, or the knowingness about why you're on this planet, your calling. Once you start to get that energy, and it comes from your heart or your soul, and the Buddhists believe that, and the yogis believe that the soul, the seat of the soul is the heart, not the physical heart, but the heart chakra, right? The energy is seated there. So that stillness allows that wisdom to be heard. It just bubbles up.
Yeah, and it's funny that you're mentioning this, like that subtle difference between grasping at the vision you think you want,
right,
and having it sort of bubble up in a more subtle way.
Vision and visualization are two different things. A vision is when it bubbles up and it's very ephemeral, right? It's like if you're in it's almost like a psychedelic vision where it's just there. It didn't take any effort. Or like if you've been in a breath empowerment or a holotropic breathing, and visions just kind of come to you, and it didn't require any effort. Visualization requires mental effort, right? You feel it. It's almost like you have to flex your brain muscle.
There's efforting there.
There's
right?
efforting there, right.
Like if you want to be, I want to be a better a husband, and when my wife comes home, I'm going to greet her with love, and
like
I'm going to visualize.
We call that like a pre-rehearsal.
Right.
It feels like effort. Like it takes energy.
Totally. I want to do well on stage for this speech,
right.
so I'm going to
conjure the image and you play it over, and you're using energy. Whereas vision that bubbles up from,
out there, man.
From
It's
somewhere.
coming from out there.
There's no in there and out there ultimately.
I'm a fucking writer. It comes. Some of that shit comes from a very strange place.
It comes from somewhere besides what we think of as our body, mind, right? It's still an aspect of us, though. And it's connected to universal intelligence or, whatever, pure awareness. These are, words are just pointers, right? It's not reality.
Yeah, very imperfent ways
very
to describe
imperfect,
that stuff.
right? So
Yeah.
don't quote me as like real, but I'm pointing to some truth based upon, I'm 58, based upon now 38 years of practice with some, twisting and turning just like everyone else. But this is like, you can find this level of stillness with probably a couple of years of practice. But if you're looking for it, or you're striving for it, it will probably take longer. Right? This is one...
Damn those paradoxes.
It is a paradox, right?
But I'm ambitious, bro.
I know. This is beyond ambition. This is where, you just stop efforting and recognize. It's kind of like the difference between Western psychology or psychotherapy and Eastern psychotherapy or Eastern mental development. Westerners... And this is what we bring into meditation. Westerners are always thinking, well, I've got to do this to fix myself because I could be better. Self-improvement all comes from that. Personal development, all of our leadership development. Do this to become better and it fixes myself, or do this to heal and I become better. The Buddhists say, don't do anything because you're already perfect. What you have to do is remove the obstacles to your perfection. Now, the Westerner will say, good, give me what to do and I'll fix it to remove that obstacle. But it's still efforting. It's like the difference between yin and yang. The Eastern point is surrender, is to allow the experience to unfold. I believe they can work hand in glove because, again, a lot of these childhood traumas and healing really are helpful for us to stay the course with a decent practice. And also when it comes to our work, and everyone, everyone's obsessed about their work because we are alive. We do these practices so we become more effective and more on point with why we're on this planet. Not to go hide in a cave or to excuse ourselves from life. It's so we become more alive and we can serve more fully. And so it's very important that we get clear on our calling and visualize that and charge that up and like really get aligned with that, right? And so clarity and charity are really important, but the utter stillness is where the clarity is found, the true clarity is found, not through trying to fix yourself.
Mm. When it comes to, I think you just laid out how to, how to get vision for dummies.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah,
enlightenment.
We can take this podcast, turn it into a book, and we're done.
Enlightenment for dummies. I really appreciate you laying that all out and showing that there isn't just a quick 5-minute practice that can lead you to that kind of insight reliably, but that it does take these habits day in and day out. When it comes to what you did mention, visualization, where let's say you're about to go on a SEAL training mission, and you really want it to go well. Would you evoke any kind of positive visualization, even in a 5-minute practice, or anything that is applicable to someone right now for a task that they have in their near future?
Absolutely. I think that's very helpful, and I do that all the time. I think the point we were trying to make earlier is that you have to have a stable mind and you have to be able to concentrate, or else the visualization doesn't work as well.
Yeah, it's like you're strengthening your core with meditation and breathing, and that's going to allow you to do all different kinds of mental exercises better.
Great analogy. So assuming you have that power, then literally, what I do is, for instance, for speeches, that's a great one. I always visualize my speeches, and it's not so much of a practice visualization. We do that in the SEALs. We call them dirt dives. We would practice the op, and the real power there was to do that as a team so that everyone was seeing the same vision. and practicing the same things together. Because once you get out in the field, things get really murky and confusing, and everyone's got clarity around, the process as well as the outcomes that you're looking for. Think about the implications for that for any team. So a team that can visualize together and has that shared vision, but they practice it together, it's really powerful. This is why it's, relentless communication and using imagery and, there's a lot of ways to do that. But back to what I've learned is, instead of, like, for me, I've gotten to the point where I have enough mastery over the content that I don't practice content. What I do is bring the image of the participants and the venue as best I can, and I'll make it up, right, if I don't have the details on that, into my mind, and I recognize them as me. And I see them engaging in the content that I'm delivering in an extraordinarily positive way, like being transformed by it. And I recognize that this relationship and this experience is happening right now as I do that. And that we are all one. And in this moment of bringing them into my world and sharing this, this awesomeness, that it is already happened, right? It's done, right? The seed has been planted. And this is what I was talking about earlier. Visualization is about planting seeds, but to use this metaphor, if the garden of your mind hasn't been weeded and fertilized and, prepared, the ground prepared, then the seeds don't drop. So when your mind is prepared at that level, bringing up an image and visualizing like that is like planting a seed really deep. And because the ground is so fertile, because your mind is so fertile, then it really blooms. And so by the time you get to that speech or that opportunity, you have no fear, and it's just pure joy. And you're having an experience that has already happened in the matrix. So
right. Well, I think it's important that you just mentioned that you'll think about it as though it's already happened.
That's right.
So instead of thinking about this future event that you'll have anxiety about coming up, you'll think about how well that event went, and evoke those kinds of feelings in the past tense. I just wanted to underscore that because I thought it was a really important detail.
Yeah. There's, for me, the more I do this work, the more I realize, and this might sound trite, but it's profound, is that, when I wake up in the morning, the world wakes up to me. I don't wake up to the world. I've recognized that we are the world. Every one of us is the totality. We're just seeing it from different perspectives. We're just experiencing it from different perspectives. So if you don't like, or you think the world is not in your favor, it's because you haven't learned that you are the world. And so you want to change the world, change yourself. Change your experience, change your mind. And then it slowly changes on the outside until your mind gets really, really powerful, and then it changes really, really quickly.
Explain that again, of the world changing really quickly.
The more powerful your mind is to concentrate energy in vision and to plant those seeds like I'm talking about, the more quickly the world will change around you. Like rapid synchronicity, rapid change.
Right.
And the most advanced powers of that, we very rarely see in humanity today, but, would be like instant manifestation of a yogi, right? The mind is the most powerful thing in this physical realm, right? The mind creates the body, so if you don't like your body, then you're thinking improperly about it.
Fuck, that's profound.
So, and the mind creates everything. So recognize that and begin to work with the mind to strengthen its power. and then to get into your heart to recognize your calling and to become aware of why you're on this planet, both the healing that you're meant to undergo as well as the service or the charity you're meant to bring, and then like use that power for good, right? And magic starts to happen.
It's interesting what you said about how like it happens slowly and then all at once.
That's right.
I think about this analogy with it was conveyed with investment and how important small investments
That's
are
right.
when you're early.
Yeah.
But the analogy is, let's say you have a pond and there's algae blooming in it.
Yeah.
And have you heard this one?
Yeah. It's
So
like
every
the penny doubling every day.
So every
Yeah.
day the algae doubles, and on day 30 the pond is going to be fully covered in algae.
Right.
On what day is the pond halfway covered with algae?
Yeah. 29. Yeah.
Day 29, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, most people think, oh, well, day 15,
right.
but day 29 because it's doubling. And I do think that is, to your point, similar with a lot of skill sets where it happens slowly and then all at once.
That's right.
Most people just quit before that happens.
This is true. And I think it's by design. It seems really hard to develop any kind of momentum. And it's hard all the way up until it's not. And it gets harder, actually, because, imagine all the work to double algae every time or to flip that penny. Then there's a lot of pennies to flip after 5 times or 10 times. And it gets harder and harder to flip all those pennies. But the rewards are enormous. Like, here's the problem with people think that mastery, that the more you work on something, that the effort goes away. The effort doesn't go away. It's just the rewards become extraordinary. And a lot of people think, okay, now that I'm there, then they stop efforting, and then the rewards start to go away. So there is no there in mastery. It's a constant process of becoming more whole and becoming more clear.
What would you say to someone, me? This is a therapy session for me. If you haven't gotten that so far, who is like last night I went diving for lobster.
Nice.
Lobster season
Cool,
just
yeah.
opened. I'm pretty into spearfishing, and I haven't done a lot of lobster diving. Went with some guys who were better than me. They all got lobsters. I didn't. 40 minutes in, I was feeling a little seasick. I was a little spooked. You're going at night.
Yeah,
it's
that's
night dives.
Scary stuff.
Yeah, it's a little spooky. And I was feeling like such a little bitch, man. I was just like, and I'm just out there like, Jesus, is this my whole destiny? Is just to like feel like I'm not enough, or like staring up at the stars, and like all of these stories are coming back, and I'm like, I fucking meditate though. I should be better than this. And I come in like feeling so bad about myself. Like not like, oh, that was like a bad day, but like utter worthlessness. And then I woke up this morning and I was like, okay, those were some stories.
Yes,
but it happens to me sometimes. Maybe it happens to someone out there listening where it feels like you're on a path and then you drop to below zero. And the question I have is, am I always destined for this? Like, am I sentenced to this? Because I've been doing this kind of work for a while, and then it still seems like I'll have these moments where it's like the shelving of self-worth just breaks.
Yeah. You're not destined to that, but that means
I've been fucked up if you would have said that.
there's more work to do. Yeah. You're
Sorry,
right.
Kyle. All right, let's end there.
Yeah,
Great.
there's just more work to do. The more work to develop distance from those thoughts and emotions, right? And so it's okay to watch those feelings come up, but not to ride them like a freaking show horse, and just to let them settle. Like they come up and they settle, and you're like, wow, that was interesting. I'm just out here spearfishing. It doesn't matter whether you get one or not, and why should you get one? You haven't practiced the skill very long, So developing that monitoring capability where you're separate from your thoughts and emotions and you're not drawn up in the drama of them. That's a big part of your work. And for most people, that's a big part of their work. And then the more you do that and the more you can drop into the non-dual, the void, or the, that witnessing, the more your meditation practice stays with you all the time. You don't have to practice in the morning and practice in the evening. And we call that taking it off the bench or off the mat. And then every moment becomes just a moment of just watching and monitoring, but also seeking the truth of your reality. And that is to try to stay in witnessing, stay in pure awareness, just watching. And the more you do that, the more the experience that I liken it to, and I do this drill with my clients, is imagine you go out, let's say you're in a beautiful place like Sedona. And we did this actually in Sedona, that's why I came up. And you go out for a walk, but imagine that you're actually not moving, but the trail is actually moving past you. This is actually what's happening. We think that we're moving all around, but we're actually we are just here from a pure awareness standpoint. And we have this mirage, this mistaken feeling that we are actually all moving about and making shit happen. And, the reality is it's all this big projection of the mind. And you're not going anywhere. You're right here. And in being right here and right now, in that timeless state, you are absolutely perfect the way you are. You couldn't possibly be fucked up. That experience is a game changer, because then everything finally takes its proper perspective.
I'm going to bring you a lobster diving with me next time.
Oh, yeah.
Mark, you're perfect, Kyle.
You're perfect, Kyle.
You're perfect, just the way you are.
Oh, no, by the way, there's the lobster right there.
Shit. God damn it. You are Buddha. I wanted to, you talk about, you work with a lot of young people, right? In their 20s and 30s, is that right? Mm-hmm. One thing that I've seen, this was written in an article. I think it was a Guardian article by a writer named Jonathan Haidt. He wrote The Coddling of the American Mind. Really interesting social psychologist, and he is writing about. It's an article called The Tower of Babel, and how because of social media we all have different base understandings of what's happening in the world, and it makes it very difficult to communicate. The Tower of Babel, the right. old story of, I believe it's like no one can understand each other, right?
I think that's by design, by the way.
Right.
I do. That's a separate story.
But he has this great line that I think just really hit home with young people in their teens, 20s, and into the millennials, where social media was designed or professed to be designed so that we could share our authentic selves. But what actually happened was it got a whole generation to share their performative selves. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now you run into this psychological problem where people feel that they constantly need to be performing. Mm-hmm. And even people who don't want public, externally facing lives are now in this space where they need to sort of shape shift just subtly to get applause from their social media crowd. Mm-hmm. And this kind of thing seems so destructive if you're looking to walk a path of authenticity, mindfulness, your true calling. I mean, it's just this tractor beam of external validation and constantly trying to chase something that's outside of you to please absolute strangers. Have you noticed this with young people that you work with, and how do you help them navigate this schism between who they really are and this performance that so many people feel like they need to put on.
Definitely have noticed it. It is a real issue or challenge. The social media and our devices, the always on 24/7 has really captured people's minds and led them to outsource their thinking capacity, right? And so their mind is being trained by social media and by these other forces. So the way that shows up is what you call the performative. Like I'm trained to think that I have to be this way or I have to think this way, and it takes them further and further away from their core, their true self. And so, self-awareness, the awareness that this is not serving you is really the first step to like recovering from that. So people who, try to come to me or would be listening to this podcast already have the beginnings of that self-awareness because they're recognizing that that's not working anymore. But until someone finds that on their own and they're earnestly seeking a different solution, then it's very difficult to work with them. Like people have to change within. Like you can't change somebody else unless you're with them every day, like you're a parent, or, who can really work with a kid who's maybe addicted to social media.
And a lot of people don't even recognize that they're doing it.
They don't recognize
they wake up from that dream.
Right, and that's kind of like the idea of waking up. That's kind of the first wake up, and it's a very appropriate metaphor. Waking up from a dream. There's many levels to waking up. So when I woke up to my story in Manhattan through the meditative process, that I was living my parents' dream and their desires for me, and I was playing right into that, then it was quite a radical shift. And that was my first wake-up call, basically. And so I started to investigate that and started to go deeper into what else. If not that, then what? And so you have to wake up to the fact that social media is training your mind and it's leading you into someone else's den of needs, right? Typically, corporate consumer needs or governmental, control, propaganda, whatever. And it's insidious and it's all over the place. So like when I work with people, I say first thing we're going to do is shut off the TV. We don't listen to network news. I haven't had that. I'm listening to network news. In fact, it's painful for me to watch it even for a minute. It's like, oh my God, like so negative and so just nonsense that I just can't do it.
Yeah, it's like the problem with becoming healthy is junk food starts to affect you worse.
Exactly.
Right?
Right.
It's like, shit, I used to be able to eat this all the time.
That's part about,
yeah.
That is a part of a mindfulness practice. Like, oh my God, where do I let this information in? How am I attracted so much to social media, and begin to be aware of that, be more mindful of that, and then begin to shut it down and use it more deliberatively, or take a complete break from it. And this is why diets from or pauses in social media, or just setting it aside for 30 days, or even going out when I did a podcast with Colin O'Brady, who's a world-class climber, and he's promoting something called 12-hour walk. And it's great because it's not the 12-hour walk with your friends chit-chatting and on your iPhone. It's like you shut the whole thing down and you don't talk for 12 hours. You just go out for a walk in nature. And at the end of 12 hours, your mind is qualitatively different. And you don't ever want to lose that experience.
Dude, right? I hear you. Nature walks are such a profound and underappreciated
absolutely
task. I mean, I'm pretty into hunting, and a lot of the time out spending hunting is just like
it's quiet.
It's armed hiking.
Yeah,
and
armed hiking.
It's armed hiking.
It's not a bad idea these days.
Exactly. But man, dude, you come back from a few days out with your phone off, and it's like all of a sudden there was just a bunch of wind swell waves, on the beach, where one wave is breaking right after the other, and it shifts to this
nice, calm,
long period groundswell where the thoughts that you have can be taken further and further. And it just, like you said, takes 12 hours, a couple days.
That's right.
Change your mind.
So that's the turnaround point. First, self-awareness that that social media and being plugged in the news and being worrying about what everyone thinks about you or worrying about what they think, it's not serving you. It's very negative, and it's really leading you way off course. So first, do the pattern interrupt. Interrupt the patterns, shut off the TV, get out in nature, shut off your phones, disengage or unplug from your social media. Or like for me as a business person, of course I have social media accounts, but I don't personally engage in them. You know, it's my content. It's stuff that I say. It's like this podcast, chunks of it will probably go on it, but I'm not on there doom scrolling. You know what I mean? I never do that. Yes, I'm very disciplined. But someone say, yeah, but you're really disciplined. I say, okay, but I started somewhere. You know what I mean? Every Navy SEAL starts with his first set of push-ups. So start by just disengaging and then get more and more engaged and experience the benefits. And then that's the beginning of a mindfulness practice, actually, right? Where you're using that as your object of attention and saying, oh, wow, look at how my mind gets drawn to that. And then begin to disengage and step away, create that metacognition, and then begin to train other mental patterns. Because if you're not training yourself, someone else is, the world is. Your mind is literally just a steady stream that is being energized either by yourself or by somebody else. And you want to take control of that mind stream.
I mentioned this idea of being a performative version of yourself. I think that I'll just ask it as a question, or maybe I'll set it up a little bit more. I think that there are a lot of people who are afraid to choose new life paths or attain different skills because they're afraid that they will lose attention from their followers. Maybe take it off of social media, but they'll lose status in their friend group. I mean, I grew up as a surfer, right? And like you move away, you start learning different skills. All of a sudden, you feel your status start to drop in one of these games, and we're playing infinite numbers of status games all throughout our lives, right? People are playing whatever, the athlete game, the finance game, the spiritual game. And sometimes it's best to let one game go or allow yourself to divert your energy into a new game. And I think that one really corrosive aspect of social media is that it really rewards people who stay in one status game. Like, you are this person, this is what you post about because this is what it gets a response from your followers from, and this is what you should continue to be doing, even though you're not interested in it anymore, and you probably you would spend your time better in other places. What would you say to someone who is afraid to let that die and let those people die potentially to go do something else?
I mean, I would simply ask, how's that working out for you? Right? How does holding on to that game making you feel? And if you feel like you're thriving and you're spiritually aligned and you're feeling very growthful and you have peace of mind, like the hallmarks of something that's really good for you is not status, it's contentment, it's peace, it's clarity. So if that game is bringing you contentment, peace, and clarity, have at it. If it's not, then there's something wrong with that. So just you got to, changing the game means not just creating some other thing that's going to make you discontent and unsatisfied. It's changing the game altogether to find the contentment and the clarity and the peace first within, and then you can play whatever game you want on the outside, but it's not going to affect that. We call that develop the still water that runs deep. You talked about the experience of the choppy ocean turning into a calm ocean. What I'm talking about is living at the depths so that you're not disturbed by whatever's going on the top of the ocean.
Hell yeah, man. That's a great place to end.
Yeah, sure is.
Where can people find you? Reach out.
My personal website is a great place, markdevine.com. And I'm at social media, at Mark Devine and Instagram and Twitter, and of course it's not really me who's going to answer your email or Twitter or whatever.
But you do these kinds of courses as well,
That's
right?
right.
Where people can do deeper training in person. When do people find that at
So-
Mark Divine as well?
They can navigate their way there. The two businesses I have, the one that does, and I really go deep into these types of conversations, is Unbeatable Mind. And that website is unbeatablemindcom. And then I'm really re-energizing SEAL Fit, because SEAL Fit's building strong minds, strong bodies, strong teams. And we're launching something next year called our quests. So one of the quests is to be SEAL Fit. Like, this is all like physical training, and it's a 3-month process to like really understand how to train physically and mentally like a Navy SEAL. And another quest is to be unbeatable, and this is where I teach a lot of the mental processes and a whole kind of self-coaching model, similar to along the lines we're talking about. But then the third quest is really where, right at the heart of what we were talking about, and that's the quest to find your inner warrior. And the fourth quest is walking with the gun, armed walking. We call that being sheepdog strong. And that's where we teach you situational awareness, how to deal with a crisis and not like be the one holding your phone up, videotaping it, right? To be on scene, deal with a medical trauma, be the guy who has a weapon, knows how to use a weapon or disarm someone if there's a first-person shooter, to like be sheepdog strong.
I'm in, man.
You would love those.
Dude.
So those are our 4 quests that we run. That's sealfit.com.
Those lobsters won't stand a
They don't
chance. Mark Divine, thank you so much.
Kyle, you're awesome, brother. Ooh, yeah.